fascinated to get these two men from the intelligence world debating this question of whether mass surveillance makes the world safer, and of course particularly pertinent because of the draft investigatory powers bill that is currently being scrutinised by a joint committee in Parliament and may very quickly become not a draft bill but a firm bill. And this is something that is engaging the whole population, not just in this country, but I think all over the world. I was in a sixth form college in East Ham, in the East End of London today, and there were teenagers thoroughly exercised by this debate and this issue, perhaps more than any other civil liberties or human rights issue that they could have asked me about today. And I think that says something for the importance of these questions, because I think perhaps the younger generation in particular live as intimately online as they do in the physical world. So let's hear a bit from each of our distinguished speakers, and then of course we will open up, I hope, for about half an hour for all of your views, your questions, your comments, and my favourite interjection, by the way, which is a comment very thinly disguised as a question. And you being scholars of King's College know how to do that. You make your comment and then you sort of raise your voice slightly at the end of the sentence as if you're French or Australian or something like that. So please, so David, your thoughts about mass surveillance. Does it make us safer? Where's the balance to be struck? You've given evidence to the scrutiny committee. Do you want to share a little of that thinking with us?
The methodological question, since we're in a King's University audience, is by what standard can we judge the efficacy of a single intelligence technique? We're going to have to start with some definitions and see if we can agree on them. Otherwise, there's little hope we'll get to agreement by the end of the evening. And we'll need to understand the nature of modern intelligence work, which is very different from the work I used to get engaged in against the Warsaw Pact. We are talking about multiple jigsaw puzzles being assembled with no lid on the box, lots of pieces. So if anyone is tempted to ask the question, how many terrorist attacks were stopped by bulk access, let me just tell you it's a dumb question. It doesn't have a sensible answer. The question you have to ask is, how effective are the British authorities using the full range of intelligence open to them, human and technical, single line access and bulk access? How good are they? And there is a certain amount of evidence we can talk about in a second about that. And then say, well, what did they say is the importance in their overall work? And primarily, this is for modern time, the Security Service and Scotland Yard SA-15. What did they say about GCHQ's product that comes from bulk access? Do they say it's valuable? Do they say it's indispensable? The evidence we took from the Lucy panel was they all said it's indispensable. Can't do without it. The US Academy of Sciences, the US equivalent of the Royal Society, was asked to examine by the President the feasibility of creating software that would allow the US intelligence community, and by extension that means GCHQ as well, more easily to conduct targeted information acquisition rather than bulk collection. In other words, exploring whether technological software-based alternatives to bulk collection might be identified in order to retain to the greatest extent possible current intelligence capabilities whilst intruding less on those that were of no known or potential interest to intelligence. One of the things that the inquiry concluded in their reports on the web, and I thoroughly recommend it, is there is no precise definition of bulk collection. It's a continuum with no bright line separating bulk from targeting. There is a bright line in UK law between different kinds of warrants, but you cannot simply extrapolate from that to the underlying reality Because the reality is a great deal of the bulk access is actually, these days, and I can't speak for what it was like when Bill was doing his pioneering work, probably very different, is targeted. And therefore, to draw a distinction between targeted on the one hand and bulk on the other is simply to get confused with words, confusing yourself with the difference between targeted so-called warrants, 8.1 warrants in the current legislation, and 8.4 warrants. The reason I labour that point is that it is common sense that an agency like GCHQ would try to access the bearers that are most likely on probabilistic evidence-based grounds to carry the communications of interest, but try as rapidly as possible to throw away everything that is not likely to be so relevant. Otherwise, you're simply stacking up costs, you're stacking up the complications of securing material. But when we come to communication data, there's one additional argument we need to think about, which is going backwards in time. So, right, justifiably or not, the terrorist attacks take place, take the Paris attacks. Some of the individuals were known, others were not. Once you know the attack is taking place, you know where, you can then start, if you have communication data, to go backwards in time to see if you can reconstruct some of the communications that might have taken place in the lead-up. And indeed, I am quite sure that has been done by our French colleagues. You can only do that, of course, if you've collected and retained the data in the first place. Logically, you can't do it in any other way. Ideally, of course, you've collected it all first time. You've got it all targeted first time. So, in the area of communications data, which, by the way, is not the same as metadata, it has a different, narrower definition in UK law. In that case, holding on to the data, collecting, accessing, and then collecting, and then obtaining is the only way of really being able to use that tool. How long should you hold on to the data for? Is a very good question. It's an empirical one. The evidence we got from the National Crime Agency when we were doing our independent review was only really about sex offenders, serious cases of child abuse. But they'd done a big study of all those cases and how far back in time would you have needed to go given the progress of those cases towards a court. 3 months or 6 months, much too short. And I can talk about the German case if you want. Beyond 18 months, very unlikely to be needed. So somewhere the bill currently has 12 months. There's probably the medium you could go for in terms of no point in retaining it beyond that.
Thank you, Sir David. So we're now going to come to Mr. Binney. I return to the question. This question was framed in a very particular way. Does mass surveillance make the world safer? FREA doesn't even come into it. We are adopting the safety paradigm here, and we have invited 2 gentlemen from the world of intelligence and security. Nobody here is me, except for me, and I'm just sitting in the chair. I think that's really important. So I wonder if in responding to Sir David, Mr. Binney, you would perhaps deal with this suggestion that it's a bit old-fashioned, it's something in English law to make distinctions between the targeted and the mass. I wonder if you would respond to the suggestion that mass surveillance or bulk surveillance is...
They're very different concepts. These are not the same thing. You must not say they are the same, because they're not. They're different.
Well,
different meanings in English.
Well, no doubt you will come back in time, Mr. David. the suggestion that what has been happening and what is proposed in draft legislation is, I quote, indispensable. And I also wonder, because we didn't really hear any of this from Sir David, whether you might comment on whether there are any risks at all to our personal cybersecurity from the kind of access and retention that is being conducted and is being proposed.
Yes, certainly I'm not a proponent of bulk acquisition. I'm certainly one who has been pushing targeted acquisition around the world, and in fact I'll go through what we meant by targeting and how we did it back in the 1990s, and then I'll give you a little preview of what they're doing now, which is evident in the Snowden material, and also related back to what we left with them when we left in 2001. But certainly on the U.S. side, bulk acquisition has basically caused us to miss virtually every attack we've ever had. And in fact, the NSA analysts have been saying that all along, and it's been documented by the Intercept and a number of things. Like they say things like we have too many choices, we're in cognitive overflow, and in praise of not knowing, right? The fallacy behind the scene. What they're talking about is they're getting pushed too much data, and they can't figure out anything. And so what happens is people are get attacked, and we pick up the pieces afterward because they've got bulk data, so they can go in and find out everybody that's ever been associated with anybody else. It's all there in that data. The other point is I would make in terms of the one case, in the Garland, Texas case, a member of Anonymous tipped off the Garland police 2 days in advance of that attack was coming. Why? Because they were focusing on known people they knew who were talking about doing criminal acts. And they came across them in social media. And they watched them. And when they said they were going to do the attack, they alerted the Garland police. Our intelligence agency said absolutely nothing. So my point is they're killing themselves by doing this. On our side of the Atlantic, they're doing that. The other points I would make very simply about bulk acquisition, the business records acquisition of bulk data under Section 215, secret interpretation by the U.S. government, has been ruled illegal by the Second Court of Appeals in the United States. I'm waiting for people to get indicted, but that hasn't happened yet. And I certainly won't hold my breath because I don't expect anybody to get indicted, but it says they've been doing this illegally all along. Well, I would argue they knew that too because they kept it secret. They knew it was illegal. In fact, two federal judges have ruled it unconstitutional also. So this will eventually stop on our side, and basically, because of the courts, if nothing else, and so this bulk data will be stopped somewhere along the line. Now, it doesn't mean that we want to do bulk acquisition on foreign targets, which means anybody other than U.S. But this gets back to the original reason we started targeting back in the 1990s, which is the same reason the analysts are talking about at NSA today. They're under too much data. So that was in the 1990s, so we started this in 1997, and by 99 we had a targeted approach working. The whole idea was, our analysts being buried, we need to find a way to pull out relevant information of the flow of massive amounts of data around the world, to pull out what was relevant to the targets they wanted to analyze. So how could we do that? We certainly didn't want to do it the way they're doing it now with dictionary select and term selects, things like that. We needed to use things that would have meaning in the end, or assemble information that would relate to the target. So that means you use the metadata to build the communities of everybody in the world. And then you look at the terrorists and build around that. This one shows all of the internal, this is where all of the data comes in to at NSA. It goes into the data banks. And down the right side, you see where you get into Marina and Mainway, those are the metadata things. And what that does is that's building the graphs of relationships, the social networks, if you want to call them that, of everybody in the world. And then it indexes that against the content on the pinwheel side, that's the digital network. And on the other side is voice. So it's indexing that data against the graph. Now they're doing that so that analytically, when someone looks at the graph, they can pull a section of that graph out and pull all of the associated data that created those relationships to begin with. Now you can timeline the digital activity of that community, or anyone in the community. So this was basically the design we left them in 2001. Near as I can tell, they've done absolutely nothing to it. This is now the analytic process they have in place to do discovery options. Now they say the traffic thief, which is a targeted approach, giving known metadata or identifying high reliable identifiers of known targets, they say that's a low probability of discovering new people. And down at the bottom, they say X-key score, after all the acquisition of data, X-key score goes across many databases. So it's pulling across, this is just the DNI part, the digital network part. X-key score goes across many databases. So, but as they move down, they say it gets higher. Well, look at what happens in the pinwheel. This is all the emails, file transfers, things like that, short messages, stuff like that. Everybody's sitting around the world, it's text. And then they're looking for words in there. They call it a dictionary select. Each analyst puts in a set of words to look for. Well, it goes across all the communications in the world. If you're looking for kill Americans, Al-Qaeda, something like that, you get all the reporters reporting in the world, you get all kinds of material that's totally irrelevant. That helps, that's the main one that really causes them a great deal of problem. The other problem is in traffic leak. There may be there must be over 1.2 million entries into that traffic leak problem. That means targets, the people of interest, and the metadata about them, but none of that has been validated. I know it hasn't been, certainly wasn't there when I was there. So people would put targets in just to see what they could get, and they never corrected. That's why, for example, Senator Edward Kennedy got on the no-fly list, and it was there for 3 months before he got off, because no one had a way of reviewing the criteria for putting him on the list to begin with. In our process, what we required was if you're going to put somebody on the target list, you had to put your name next to that, and you had to put the reason why you were doing it. So you had an auditing process for validating the targets you're putting on the list. Secondly, this traffic thief basically pulls out what they know. They should expand that to say, look at the network that is involved around the known targets. Look at the first hop, the first degree away, and then the second one, and don't go any further than that. That defines the zone of suspicion around known targets. This is how you begin to do and incorporate development in an automated process and make it work automatically. Also in there, you look at things, I call that the deductive approach. A talks to B, B talks to C, so you're deductively pulling them together. The inductive approach is something like you have websites that advocate or that are showing things like pedophile activity, and you watch people who visit those pedophile sites. You don't have them talking about other pedophiles, but you see them showing the properties that evidence will suggest they're pedophiles. So they fall into that zone of suspicion that way. The same would be with terrorists if they visit advocating sites that advocate violence against the West or jihad or whatever. You may be catching them when they start visiting in the process of being radicalized. So then they fall in without any direct connections to a terrorist into the zone of suspicion. Then there's another category which I call abductive, which simply said you look at the distribution of the entire community and you look at all the communities in the software does this, not people. But this is all done by software. You have the software look at all the communities going node for node in the 4 billion nodes in the network, roughly. And you look at their community and look at the distribution of it geographically and say, is it distributed like for example, the nodes are in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Yemen, Libya, and so on. That's a distribution that would suggest that it may be associated with the terrorism. So then you throw that community in, it's a totally new one, you didn't know about it before. This is how you throw it in and look at it and then investigate because it falls into that zone of suspicion for that reason. And so you get rid of this dictionary select approach, which is really causing analysts to be inundated. And certainly going into marine is like the graph of the digital network, all your relationships and so on. The problem with the graph is that if you allow analysts to roam through it, they can go take a node, look at a community around it at one hop and say, gee, that looks interesting. Go to the next node, look at the community around that, gee, that looks interesting. So they could go n number of hops. There's no limit to how many hops you can do, about 4 million, right? So, but you can do that all day long and achieve absolutely nothing. So the point is you have to limit the search area of the animals so they're in a rich environment to succeed. That was the approach we took, and the point was we could get a rich environment for them to succeed, develop the target, watch it develop and evolve, and also at the same time give everybody on the planet privacy. Because we wouldn't take anybody else's data in. All this selection was done right up front, right off the taps on the fibers, right off the satellite access, right off everything. That selection was filtered, that was our filter that we used, and that was the first thing they threw out when we left. They threw that out because once you've captured it, you can take it in. So that's what they did. They stopped that filter and took in everything. We also encrypted the attributes of people who weren't involved in anything, and that's the other thing they removed. They removed that encryption which protected identities, and so now they had the identities of everybody. They had at least the social relationships that they had in their identities. They didn't have the content because we didn't take the content until they removed the filter at the front. Then they got the content too. So that was the biggest problem with me. That made these comments continue. They're the same comments analysts were making in the 1990s, and not much has changed today. So this bulk, from our side, this bulk data has not been productive at all. In fact, it's been destructive because they're wasting their time and they can't stop any attacks that are coming.
Thank you. You're being very polite and academic in King's College War Studies, and there are no claps for anybody, but if you feel moved later on, please relax. But this is also a Liberty meeting. And by the way, welcome to anyone who's watching online, because this event is being live streamed as well. So David, that's quite a challenge, isn't it? It's being suggested that if you're looking for a needle, perhaps don't build an ever bigger haystack. It's being suggested that it is possible to design a more targeted approach into the technology, and by not doing so, we're actually less safe because we're not being as smart with this technology as we could.
That's where I'm ever more mystified, because that's exactly what GCHQ does today. That's what was briefed to the independent inquiry. Bill makes a lot about dictionary search. Dictionary search isn't used that way anymore. It was 10 years ago, when looking at something like a microwave bearer, where the volume was not too big and you could hope you might actually get a hit. But if you tried that today on the internet, you'd get millions of hits. And they don't do it, because these are not stupid people at GCHQ. They are very well aware of the responsibility they've got to uncover threats to the UK and support our military activity. So there's something very odd, frankly, about what you've just heard, because the way in which chaining takes place, so you have a seed, you have a suspect. Bill's described how you would then go off. You would try and establish a network. With luck, you might uncover a new threat. That is the day-to-day work of analysts at GCHQ.
But the powers in the bill are much broader than that.
No. The
law I do know. So
yeah,
I don't know the technology, but the law I do know, and the powers that are being sought are much broader than the methods that you say are happening today.
I've already made the point, Shami, that the one area you can't tackle satisfactorily that way without retaining the data is where you want to go back in time, because you have a new clue, you have a new piece of information, and you want to try and reassemble, for example, the network that carried out the Paris attack. So if you have retained the data, then you can go and interrogate it using the kind of methods Bill is talking about.
But
all of this activity...
But isn't that a justification? I hear what you say, and that must be right, that if you could go back forever, theoretically you'd be able to find something that you'd be able to find out who killed Julius Caesar.
Evidence already that came from the NCA, which is you don't want to go back forever. You've got to reach a reasonable amount. Now the bill says 12 months, That seems to me certainly good enough to try out for the next couple of years. If it needs to be lengthened or shortened, that's something the new judge, the commissioner,
So I have a
can
question. I just want
advise
to
on.
understand. I just want to, no, seriously, I genuinely want to understand what's being said here. So two things, two questions for you, Sir David. We now have the kind of digital technology at our disposal that would literally allow us to place devices in every single office and family home in the country, and bad things happen in people's family homes. We have the technology now. We could say, could we not, that there's domestic violence, there are sex offences, there are terrorist conspiracies, there are paedophile conspiracies happening in the physical world behind closed doors. We have the technology. We can plant digital microphones and cameras in every one of these buildings, and we will capture this information, but we won't look at it. We'll just capture it and
This is an
store it.
absurd argument. You
Why
keep
is it
using this
absurd?
argument, but it
Why
is.
is it absurd? It's doable, and it would catch people
Well,
potentially.
it is.
So why is that not okay?
Well, it's not doable. It's a fantasy. It's a straw argument that you are erecting here.
Because
Well, just think about it for a moment. Put it another way, for many, many years, the authorities have had the power, if they can justify the case, to intrude on our privacy.
in a targeted way.
In a targeted way. Now, what I've been describing is the targeted way in an internet world where you don't have a single wire in which you can put a crocodile clip, or you don't have the address in which you can go and plant a bug. And you have to try and conduct your targeted, your chaining, to use that example from Bill, you have to try and use what information you've got to uncover as much as you can of what is going on. This has got nothing whatever to do with planting bugs in everybody's house. The whole...
But you do appreciate that people live as
Before-
intimately online now as they do in their
Yeah, well,
homes.
don't exaggerate the metadata. But that, incidentally, is a very good reason why the government was right to stick to the communication data definition in the bill, not the metadata.
There's an innovation in the bill that recognises in law for the first time interference,
Yeah.
which we might call hacking. Some of us call hacking, but it's equivalent of interference. Now, perhaps it's been going on, but as you have said to David, it's taken 500 years to put the secret surveillance activities of the state under the rule of law. So what that implies about what was happening 5 minutes ago is neither here nor there. But my practical question is this. I understand the suggestion that if you suspect a person or a place or a conspiracy and you want to put these people under surveillance, you may think that equipment interference is a proportionate way to do it. My concern is this, that unlike other methods of intrusive surveillance, once you have done the interference, my understanding is you have left an ongoing vulnerability to the cyber security of that person or that institution or that group or that server or that equipment that they will never know is there, and you have left those citizens, those companies, those people now vulnerable on an ongoing basis to cyber attack.
That's one of my problems with what NSA does internally. They've got two parts to NSA. 80% of it roughly is operations. That's where I was. That means you break code ciphers and attack things and break in. The other side is Information Assurance Directorate. That's those who are supposed to protect the communication of the U.S. government. And my problem is that when, I tried to discuss certain things with them and they wouldn't talk to me. So I know the operations doesn't necessarily talk to them about the weaknesses in firewalls, operating systems, networks. So they don't talk it or tell them so they can go fix them, because if they fix them, the windows will close, they won't be able to see in communications of people. So they want, the operations wants it open so they can read everything. And so they don't tell IAD what the weakness is, so they don't get fixed. So mine and about 21 million other U.S. citizens who have clearances or have ever had clearances, all of our data was taken out by the Chinese from OPM, Office of Personnel Management. So they now have my SF-86 and all the data that goes with it on my history, work history, and all the things that I did at NSA are part of that too. So it's all in there, and they all have it. Now that gives them, very simply, the reason they went after that is they wanted to know in every embassy and consulate and everywhere around the world which were the spies or agents. And so now they've got that, all 21 million plus of us.
So, Sir David, if hacking or interference is ever to be a legitimate and proportionate surveillance technique, should there, at some time afterwards, at least be an obligation on the state to inform innocent citizens that they are left with that devastating cyber vulnerability?
I don't think you can generalise. I really.
Well, in law, should there be an obligation to tell people they've been hacked?
Certainly not. There's a paradox here, because as end-to-end encryption spreads, and as metadata will eventually become less useful, this will be my prediction, it takes many years, so the importance of being more targeted will rise. One of the ways of being more targeted is equipment interference, because you have actually got at the handset of the telephone, or these days it's not a telephone, digital mobile device being used by the terrorist through some very clever, no doubt rather brave work by a human agent. Or you have managed to find where the darknet site is in which cyber exploits are being sold for money by criminals. And you have managed to get a bit of malware onto that site, which enables you to track the people who are going to buy the malware. Now, the golden rule, and this I think is what you're getting at, which I fully agree with, is that nothing must be done to weaken the systems on which the internet relies. And certainly if you want to know the comings and goings and the communications of people such as very serious criminal groups or hostile states, you're going to have to use these kind of techniques, because the old-fashioned, blunt approach and fancy cryptography and so on is really not going to get you there.
Can we now open it up to the audience for any interjection you would like to make? End-to-end encryption.
Yep.
What about our values and you made the final point?
First of all, I agree very strongly on the no weakening of standards. Back in the day, there were all sorts of things going on to see whether or not you could, say, weaken the random number generator, or some fancy way of double elliptic curves or whatever it might be. Those days are over, and everybody knows they're over. So, no weakening of standards. The British economy and our social future depends on the internet completely. We've mortgaged our future to the internet. It has to be secure. And that is number one priority. That's why I think the Chancellor of the Exchequer is paying quite a lot of attention to this subject. What will happen, of course, is that content through bulk access will get harder and harder because it's all going to be end-to-end. Even communications data is going to get harder. There'll be more over-the-top services. But these things don't disappear overnight. The bill might have 10 years life in it. Well, that'd be great. Help keep us safe. But none of this is forever. The point about values is a very good one, but don't let's sell ourselves short. The IP bill, even in its present form, will probably get improved, but even in its present form, is a gold standard for Europe. No other country in Europe that I'm aware of has anything like this, and some have virtually nothing at all. So don't let's sell ourselves short on that. And don't forget, this is not about terrorism. That just happened to be something which is on the media mind and the public mind. This is a much bigger issue around intelligence gathering, foreign intelligence gathering.
Values. There was a point about values and whether
Yeah, that was one of the things I kept, in spite of the criminal approach that my government took in many areas, going to the dark side, going to Dick Cheney. I was always trying to insert the values of following the law and abiding by the Constitution. Both of those things they had threw out the window with Dick Cheney in charge. We in the NSA called the program that he set up a Cheney blood oath. That is, once you entered the dark zone, you took this blood oath to always serve Dick Cheney, basically. So that was the problem that I saw, was a character and integrity problem also, because people who volunteer or continue to do those things without objecting are sacrificing their character and integrity in the process. But I'm an advocate for people joining the intelligence community, because I think if you go in with your integrity and character and retain it with the understanding they're going to try to subvert you, then that's a good infiltration of their network. So at any rate,
Leveraging social media.
oh yes, leveraging social media. I used to run the analytics side of the SIG and Automation Research Center. So we had all the programs I was talking about, we were running automatically with software. No people were involved in the process. So what I would do is to put together a social media data mining thing as social media went by. First of all, you're on the fiber. You can take everything off the fiber if you want to look at it. So that's what I would be doing, and freezing it for just a millisecond or so to scan it, and then letting it go by if it didn't meet any threshold of targeted information off that, using it against social media, things that would reliably produce something you have to look at. That's the whole approach of doing a traffic analytic, crypto TA focused professional target attack.
It may be worth just thinking for a moment about the question of access. If you have an individual in the United Kingdom and you know where they are, the place, or you know who they are, the person, you can get an 8-1 warrant, and with a bit of luck, though not always, the telecommunications companies will be able to deliver. Gets harder with Skype and all those other things. But if you don't know much about the individual, and they're not in the United Kingdom, but you suspect they are, because you have other, say, human sources of intelligence, you think they're a danger, they're plotting something, where are you going to get the communications? And you mustn't forget the role that bulk access plays. When I say bulk, it just means accessing the global network in the places where you think the communications, let me pick an example at random, between Crimea and Moscow, are most likely to be found. And if you are interested in whether currently those in paramilitaries in Crimea are under Moscow control, you might actually want to try and get at some of those communications.
So
that is done under a bulk warrant, because there's no other mechanism. But it's targeted, all right, and you know exactly what the target is you're trying to look for. So that, I think, is really worth thinking about. The 8-1, when we say targeted warrants, is a UK stuff.
Do you want to come back on that point, Mr. Binney?
Yeah, I wanted to show the slide that showed worldwide access with over 50,000 implants around the world on the switches and servers, which were, I mean, as part of that was like selling Cisco routers and intervening in the shipment, implanting hardware and software, as allowing you to own that switch anywhere in the world. And it shows the distribution of some of this in Russia and China and various other places. The point is that they've infiltrated the network worldwide. They've also stolen the SIM cards from 2 billion SIM cards a year, I think, which allows them access to who you are and the key to access your device, which means they can implement things in it.
Nothing to do with mass surveillance. This is about actually achieving your targeted
But they-
Exactly,
objective.
this is targeted, absolutely.
So why then do you need bulk surveillance to achieve the example that my colleague read from the Home Secretary's evidence?
Because you need to get at the data. And that is, as it were, you need an 8-4 warrant to do that in British terms, not an 8-1 warrant, which isn't going to get you anywhere near the target. So be careful of this word targeted. We're using it in two quite different meanings in the course of this discussion. One, legal in relation to the kind of warrant. The other, which Bill and I are agreeing on, in terms of knowing exactly what we're trying to go after and being ruthless about cutting everything else out of the way.
But shouldn't we be trying to bring, in a democracy, shouldn't we try to bring the law and the intrusive surveillance practice together?
The bill is making a, I'm sure you can probably improve the bill, but the bill is making a valiant attempt to do that in comparison with what we worked on, which was REPA 2000, which instituted this slightly artificial distinction.
So the other 2 points, just to remind you before we take your final remarks and close the evening, were about the potential dangers of this kind of capacity for rival politicians, activists and so on. And following on from that, the gentleman who spoke of the future, he feels comfortable-ish now in a mature democracy, but what kind of capacity are we building and what risks for the future?
I can only add a few points that actually happened inside the United States. For example, the IRS has access to this data too, and they were targeting the Tea Party, a political active group. They also targeted religious groups, and they also went after, not the IRS, but the FBI, I think it was, went after Occupy Group, so politically active groups. They also went after reporters, Jim Rosen, the Associated Press. They also came after us with fabricated evidence, we were whistleblowers, okay? So they tried to indict us, get us in jail for 35 years under the Espionage Act, all on fabricated evidence. But we caught them and threatened them with malicious prosecution, and they dropped it immediately. So this is the kind of power that this kind of information gives to governments. And there are people in there who will abuse it if they can. And they already have. So it's really a dangerous situation.
Yeah. I mean, my argument is this. I hope I have said enough to convince at least some of you that these capabilities are needed for foreign intelligence, for supporting military operations, and counter-terrorism, and indeed to deal with threats to cyber security. But I would be the first to admit they are powerful tools. They've always been powerful, but they're getting more powerful. Therefore, the case for having stronger oversight and regulation is there. You then have to look at the bill and say, can you improve it? Can you think of better ways? One of the things they're doing is bringing the different judges together, the commissioners together, giving them a proper support staff, setting up a technical group to advise them. So there are things going on there which I think are to be welcomed. If there are other better ideas for oversight and so on, I've no doubt they will come up in the House as the bill goes through. On the final point, I don't have a satisfactory answer about the longer term. I'm not sure I can even predict, 5 years out, what the internet-related developments with the Internet of Things is going to look like. That's another area we haven't had time to talk about, but where we will also need safeguards when we've instrumented our homes, we've instrumented our bridges, our traffic lights, everything has information, big data, cars being communicated over the Internet. That's another reason for not messing around with encryption standards.
A final thought?
Well, when they move that into controlling pacemakers, I'll wear a Faraday cage. So, anyway, I guess my point is that I didn't point out all of the legal use of the data. I mean, law enforcement use of the data. The FBI and CIA are also going directly into the NSA databases with no oversight whatsoever. And they're using it to catch criminals, and they're using it under our laws unconstitutionally and illegal. So they, according to Senator Feinstein, have used this data and information to put hundreds of people in jail every year. And they had, at one point, Amnesty International's challenge to versus Clapper's challenge made it to the Supreme Court, and the Solicitor General lied to the Supreme Court to get that case thrown out as one of the factors to get it thrown out. He said that anybody that had NSA data used against them in a court of law, the defendant would be told. Well, that was absolutely a lie. No one's been told. He went back scrambling, trying to figure out how many, and there's just too many. There's too many thousands to have. You know, all those cases could be reversed automatically based on the fact that they used fabricated evidence. They use a parallel construction, meaning they go and get the same data using standard policing techniques. But when they do that, they substitute that for the NSA data as the basis for arresting the person to begin with. Well, that's a fabrication. It's perjury in a court of law. So I called it a planned program perjury policy run by the Department of Justice of the United States. I couldn't think of another P to put in there. So I got 4 in a row. But anyway, that's the problem with this data. It can be used in many ways. Law enforcement now is using it. In fact, Reuters did a report on that in August of 2013, and they said when they interviewed one of the federal agents that was involved, knowing where the source of the data come in the program, he said, "This is such a great program, I just hope we can keep it secret." What was this not democracy? I mean, this kind of information being stored by NSA for years. I'm not GCHQ, I'm not sure how long they're storing it, but for NSA, it's for years. This gives the opportunity to retroactively analyze anybody they want. Anyone like Elliot Spitzer, to get rid of him because he's going after the bankers on Wall Street for the fraudulent solicitations in 2007 and 8. They had to get rid of him, so what do? They go right in that data and find somebody, got rid of him. Got to protect your bankers, right? Anyway, for me, I just see bulk acquisition for any period of time greater than, say, 3 days is a threat to society, a threat to democracy everywhere in the world.
Well, we can certainly agree that we need a new legal regime, and I think there's been some, so there is some agreement, I think, in the room about the need for a new law. I think there has to be agreement about the importance of this debate, though clearly there has been controversy about the way in which that debate was brought to public attention and scrutiny. I think there was some consensus about the practical desire for a more targeted approach to intelligence gathering and sifting, though there was difference about what that means in practice and what the legal checks and balances should be. But nonetheless, I must give the warmest thanks to both Sir David Omand and William Binney, and to King's College and to the War Studies Department, and of course to all of you.